Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. We have reached that point in the offseason where we're talking about the coaches. For our coaches show, we're going to talk about the new regime. Had big changes this offseason, probably the most impactful change that the Seahawks had in quite some time, actually. Moved on from Pete Carroll after, 13, 14 seasons, and it went from the oldest coach in the NFL, Keith, to the youngest coach. I like the moves. If you're going to make that move, I like the way they did it. I like the timing. I like the methodical approach, the patience that John Schneider had when he waited for Mike Macdonald to become available to him to interview and so forth. I thought that worked out as about as good as you can imagine for the Seahawks. And I thought we got one of the best, if not the best, up-and-coming young defensive-minded coaches, which I really like as far as a head coach. And then thought we knocked the offensive coordinator job out of the park after Mike Macdonald was hired, with Ryan Grubb coming on board, and then managed to get his offensive line coach, Huff, to come with him after recently relocating to Alabama. And then everything else just kind of fell into place after that. So fun conversation today. I'm not sure exactly where this thing goes. We'll talk a little scheme. We'll talk a little personality, philosophies, our hopes and dreams for not only this year, but for the years to come. Welcome in. How you doing?
Well, considering somebody decided to get me up really early in the morning on my first day of summer.
Hey, you agreed to this schedule. I can't.
Yeah,
I
know,
gave you the option of showing up. Yeah, showing up a little bit later in the morning, and you said no. Let's do 8.
Yeah, let's.
And
do
I was
8.
like, okay.
Let's get this show done so that I can, have my day to procrastinate and get stuff or not get stuff done that I really need to do. Because
this is your week, man. This is your week. It's you're done. School's the long season. You do a lot.
Yeah.
You deserve the time. So, okay. So let's get this conversation rolling. So let me ask you this. Let's set this thing up. What did you think of the approach of moving on from Pete Carroll and the idea that we in fact did move on? Let's start there.
Well, I mean, I felt that because of the success that the team had had under Pete Carroll, which was unprecedented in team history, that Pete was going to be given a chance to kind of go out on his own terms. Unfortunately, he dug his heels in on some assistant coaches and kind of basically lost that right, because, I mean, I guess going out on your own terms is different than living on your own terms. And he wanted to roll everything back in terms of his coaches for another year. And it was clear that his coaching staff was, especially on the defensive side of the ball, was bad.
He lives and dies with loyalty. Really does.
Yeah, he does. And so it felt a little weird. It also felt a little bit of like, be careful what you wish for, because we've seen every other coach in Seahawks history.
Yes. Yeah. And save for 2 others, really, Chuck Knox and Mike Holmgren.
Yeah. And both of them kind of like with Pete Carroll, were good early and then less good later as the NFL kind of moved by him. It's the same thing. I mean, that's what happened to Holmgren. It's what happened to Knox, and it's what happened to Pete. Like, they were really good in the first few years that they were with Seattle, and then the NFL caught up with them.
The crazy thing, and you've been around nearly as long as I have. I've been around since the very beginning. One thing I can say is that franchises live and die by the head coach and the quarterback. There's no two other positions in all of sports that are so closely tied to success than those two in the NFL. And having had a lot of success, save the Mora year in between Holmgren and Carroll, Seahawks have had a really nice run here. I mean, let's be honest, to have that stability in sports is very rare. I mean, you look at the Patriots and you look at the success that they've got there in Kansas City and Philadelphia prior to that with Andy Reid. Man, you gotta search very high and wide to find someone else that had the success and run that both Holmgren and Carroll had. However, that was kind of diminishing returns with Pete. We went through that 2014 season and then had some diminishing returns, but then also he kind of built that back up, reinvented himself a little bit, reinvented the defense, kind of made some structural and scheme changes, and ran that back up to 12 wins. But then after that, it was just one failure after another as far as how the defense was put together, and the accumulation of talent was just not there.
I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that last statement. Because
at times, I mean, anytime you're going to run a 9-win or 8-win or 7-win team, your talent is falling off a little bit.
True, they didn't have the best roster in the NFL like they did in 2013 and 2014, but the roster was good enough to. Last year's roster was good enough to win. It seriously was. Look at the defensive talent. Look at the defensive talent that they had on the roster last year, and look at where the defense ended up statistically as one of the worst. That to me was like the coaching staff and scheme on the defensive side of the ball were in over their head, and the scheme was old, and
the players wasn't tuned out.
Yeah, it wasn't working. The players had tuned out. The rest of the NFL knew what Seattle was going to do and knew how to beat it. And that is honestly what got Pete Carroll fired.
Yeah, because Pete was always about, hey, we're going to do one thing, and we're going to do it really well. And he didn't try to disguise it. He did, and so
which was
when they
great
didn't
when
do
you
that,
had multiple, a future
Pro Bowlers
Hall of Famers,
Hall of Famer,
all over that roster. But
when they didn't do that one thing really well, that was the end. And then they didn't really try to do that one thing really well very hard for like four consecutive seasons. It's like, okay, you give Pete the benefit of the doubt in one season, no problem, right? 2 seasons, you start to hear the chatter. Hey, is it time? 3 seasons, we should probably really think about, replacing Pete and so forth. That chant got pretty loud in 2022 after the 2022 season. And then after 2023, it was pretty much writing on the wall. Although I will say we were tepid for the reason you stated up front, which is be careful for what you wish for, because you just never know what you're going to get. And we've been through the seasons where the wrong choices have led to very poor teams. Now,
we've been through the Jim Mora year. We've been through
with all that
Dennis
said,
Erickson years.
What do you think of this, how this hire was handled in the offseason with Schneider and where we are today?
I actually didn't mind it. It felt like Dan Quinn was sitting there and wasn't going anywhere. They always had. They could hire him at any moment, and that would be done. But they didn't want to just be like, okay, that's easy, let's do it. They wanted to look for the home run, and they didn't want to like settle for the double. And so they they sat around and waited for their pitch. I'm loving the baseball analogy this morning. But seriously though, They sat on it. They waited. They didn't want to rush it. They really looked at 2 guys, Ben Johnson and Mike Macdonald, and they met with Ben Johnson and were less than impressed. And
apparently he was too, because he He backed out right after that.
Well, yeah, he
said, "I'm going back to Detroit."
True. I'm just saying, like, the interview went really poorly. So, like,
where have you heard that? I haven't heard that.
I've heard that in multiple places, that he came in very, like, arrogant and just it didn't come off well.
Prime time.
Yeah, and it wasn't just in Seattle; it was with his other interviews too. I heard that more coming out of Washington than Seattle, because Seattle never actually says anything about that. But it did leak out of Washington that, like, wow, this guy is not ready to be a head coach, because he's arrogant, he's asking for like $10 million a year, and yeah, just crazy.
It seems like that was always going to be Plan B. It seemed like the Mike Macdonald thing, in retrospect and watching it in real time happen, always seemed to be Plan A, based on just both coaches were in the playoffs. Schneider had to wait to talk to both of them, but it always seemed like Mike Macdonald was the guy that they, and Johnson was Plan B, maybe Quinn was Plan C type of a thing. So this hire happens. We've heard, after the fact, how it happened with the meeting at Starbucks, and the jiving and the camaraderie between the general manager and the head coach kind of come together very quickly and rapidly, and just kind of boom, go. They were already behind the 8 ball anyway. So talk to me about that process, and talk to me about the things that you've learned through the process up until now about Mike Macdonald and the kind of core values and cultural fit.
Well, one of the things that was interesting about the Mike Macdonald hire is that if you listen to the words they say, he sounds like Pete Carroll. Defense, we're going to win with toughness. We want to run the ball. We want to, out physical people. Like, it's a lot of the same words. And so a lot of people question, they're like, are we just getting Pete Carroll 2.0? Do we want that? But then you have to look at what's behind those words. With Pete, there was those were the words, but scheme wise, it was about, hey, we're going to run cover 3, and we're going to only run cover 3, and we're just going to do it really well. And with Mike Macdonald, it's, we're going to do everything, and we're going to be super confusing for opposing teams. We're going to hide everything really well. We're going to do the exact opposite of what Pete Carroll does in terms of like complexity. And but they still have that underlying tenet of, toughness and physicality and all of that as far as the words. Right. So in a sense, as far as like the cultural side of things, I kind of liked it. I felt that they needed to switch. They needed something different. But we don't want to swing the pendulum so far in the other direction and get like the militant Bill Belichick style head coach in here. Like that wasn't going to work either. And so they found someone with similar like core values, but just a different way of going about it. And I thought overall it was a good fit.
I like, so, Pete being 72 and acting like a 39-year-old kind of is a transition point for these two coaches, because you actually have a 30-some-odd-year-old. And youth and vibey energy thing going on with Mike, but also Pete ran his ship fairly loose on purpose to allow have their personality shine. That's how he wanted to put them in positions to be successful, was to allow them to be themselves enough to where they showed their core strengths and character, and he could use that to kind of help put them in spots. Mike Macdonald still has that kind of fun mentality, youthful way of looking at things and so forth, but he's a little bit more regimented. So he's kind of in betweener, not as far as Belichick, not nearly as far as Carroll. He's kind of right in the middle. and if you listen to like Tyler Lockett talk about Mike Macdonald, he's like, there's a lot of things to like about the culture and all that kind of stuff. Very similar in the way that they approach things and treat people with respect, put players first, etc. But also their structure. And we didn't have that under Pete. And I think with a new system coming in, you really do need the structure, because otherwise, I don't know if it's a great learning environment, because you've got a lot to learn. You've got a lot to teach. So I liked the hire. I mean, anytime you make this kind of move in the NFL, it's just a gamble. But if you're going to err, you err on the side of what Schneider did, which is err on the side of a great scheme, a coach that can come in and scheme you. Because I think that's the real difference here. Is Mike Macdonald's not only a head coach, but he's also essentially the defensive coordinator. He's going to call the defensive plays on Sundays until Aiden Durd is trusted, I guess, enough to be able to handle that if that transition even happens. So let's talk.
Before we move on from Macdonald and the hire, we needed to talk about the story of their first meeting between Schneider and Macdonald, because this is freaking hilarious and I love it. So they're in Baltimore, and Schneider texts Macdonald, was like, "Hey, I'm at Starbucks. Do you want me to grab you anything?" And Macdonald was nearby.
They had a meeting. They had a meeting planned at at a hotel conference room, so they could have an interview process.
I know the area. I know what Starbucks you're in. And he just is. He
didn't text that. He just showed up.
He just showed up and put his hand on Schneider's shoulder, because he was standing there waiting for his coffee, and was like, "Hey, dude." But of course, you think about it, you're on the East Coast, but of course they met at Starbucks, right? But it was just that kind of like
just two bros hanging out.
Two bros hanging out, even though they'd never met, and they just clicked in terms of their philosophies, the way they work together, just their personalities, like everything about it just made a lot of sense for both of them. And it was kind of a done deal. Like they met for a couple hours, and then it was like, all right, I need to get you on a plane and bring you back with me to Seattle. Let's do this.
It's interesting if you really dive just a little deeper into Schneider, and we all have seen this over many years, is Schneider's really quippy. He's quick-witted. He's dry sense of humor. He's kind of out there with that. But immediately, like a switch, the guy can turn very serious and very much about the nuts and bolts, all the components that make up football operations. He's dived straight into that and can be very serious. Mike Macdonald's similar. You watch him interview and so forth. He's fun. He smiles a lot. He's can be playful with his players. We saw that with Devin Witherspoon kind of quipping back to him about owning the offense one day at practice, and Macdonald loved that little comment, but then immediately, boom, right back into the conversation in a serious way. And I think that's how they kind of vibe together, is like they have fun, but also they get down to business pretty quickly.
And I love the interactions with the players, like taking the team's leaders. Lockett, who's the longest tenured Seahawk, and Witherspoon, who's probably the most talented current Seahawk. And those guys are already like, they make jokes with him. Like there isn't this like standoffishness. Wow, that's a word. But at the same time, there's clearly respect, and it bodes well, because it's how it should be, and it happened very quickly. So I'm really excited about this hire, and I hope that this isn't one of those situations where we look back in a couple of years and go, "Damn, why did we like this hire?" But
yeah.
I mean, we've seen that before.
And you just never know. I mean, they've got to do it on the field. All this stuff that we're talking about is all fine and dandy, but The reality is you've got to perform on the field. There's more about being a head coach than just a play caller, a coordinator. And Mike Macdonald's going to find that out in short order. And that's why he brought in a guy like Leslie Frazier, for example, to kind of help this transition. Leslie Frazier comes in with 25 plus years of experience as a head coach, as a defensive coordinator, as a guy that's just been around running teams, running systems for a long time, was kind of an original mentor to Mike, 9-10 years ago in the NFL when Mike was first starting to come up. And he kind of went back to that well again and said, "Hey, Leslie, I could use you in this system during this year for me." And he came, and I think that's a great hire, just to add some stability, wisdom, knowledge, kind of to the overall coaching room.
Yeah, and it's not knowledge of the defense or the scheme or any of that. It's how to set up and organize all of your meetings and just integration of things. And it's just the nuts and bolts of running a franchise that you see all those things as a defensive coordinator. But since having never done it, and you've only done it on the defensive side and not everything, that maybe there's things that get missed or forgotten, and you've got someone there to double check your work, cross your T's, dot your I's, and make sure that everything is exactly the way you want it to be. And having that experience is really important.
Yeah. I mean, Mike Macdonald can have the best visions in the world, but to actually put them into service is a whole other thing. Okay. So now we go into the installation phase of installing a new scheme. You've got new lingo, new language all over the place. Nothing is the same. You've got, essentially, when you take a look at Mike Macdonald's defense, it's very similar to what Pete Carroll ran the last couple of years, minus all the disguises and movement and duplication as far as multiple
minus
positions.
Everything that makes it
minus everything that makes it, yes, right. And so while everyone can diagnose and play against Pete's scheme pretty easily, as proven the last couple seasons, playing against Mike Macdonald's scheme is very challenging. While simple, it's very multiple. It's very much comes out of a disguise, multiple different fronts and looks and so forth, to make it challenging on opposing quarterbacks to, pre-diagnose, pre-snap, read the defense. And out of that, he gets a lot of pressure, even though he doesn't rush more than 4 very, very much. And on the back end coverages and so forth, they just kind of run a lot of different things with a lot of different players playing a lot of different positions. And it's kind of a very fun defense and very successful. Now, they may well figure this out in the long term. It depends on how adaptable this defense becomes, but it's very hopeful. And already, Mike Macdonald's scheme, if you will, is being run by 5 or 6, maybe 7 NFL defenses this season. So this is very rapidly becoming a defensive choice around the NFL. But now we've got the architect essentially as our head coach and coordinator. So it'll be interesting and fun. Everything I've heard, Keith, about the defense, the scheme, the players, all that kind of stuff, everyone seems to really love this opportunity to shine in this thing. What are you hearing?
Well, okay, what I'm hearing is the guys are having to work really hard to learn it, because it's not just here, learn all these different plays and different coverages and that kind of stuff. But Macdonald is requiring people to learn what everyone else is doing too. Not just what your responsibilities are in this particular play call, but what are the, if you're a corner, what are the safeties' responsibilities? What are the linebackers' responsibilities? That way you know where they are, and you can adjust based on what you're seeing. because you know where people are and where they aren't, and you can make those adjustments to tighten things up on the fly. And it's a lot of extra learning. It's a lot of work. Not that any of these guys aren't up to it.
He's kind of teaching the entire philosophy of the play call, not just, okay, you're lined up here, you go. Mm-hmm. You're going to learn everyone else's because it's so basic and overarching, kind of a simple scheme, and the way he teaches it though is multi-layered, where you're teaching the philosophy of the play. What are we trying to do from every position on the field in this call? And so if the players understand that, it's a little easier as time goes on. Initially, it's like, oh my God. But as time goes on, you understand why you're doing things as a player. You understand why, the left cornerback, you're the right cornerback, why the left cornerback is playing that play this way, the free safety's doing his thing, why we're rushing the way that we're rushing and so forth. We never did that. So I think at one time I heard, gosh, I can't remember, one of our coordinators say that they tried to do that. They tried to kind of teach multiple positions to each player so they kind of understood, and they kind of got away from that a little bit. Obviously.
Chris Richard. It was Chris Richard who really wanted to do that. He wanted guys to know better. He thought it would help with communication and that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, what happened is he didn't get support from his position coaches and Pete. Pete was very much, nope, keep everything simple. Keep it simple so they play fast. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. And okay, it is a football thing where it's like, no, you do your job. You do what we tell you to do. You do your job. Don't worry about anything else. There's a lot of that attitude. I remember Mike Holmgren really getting into it with his center, Pete Kendall, because Pete would always ask why. Why are we doing it this way? And Holmgren would get furious as if it was like that Kendall was questioning him, challenging him, right. But he wasn't. He was trying to learn. He was trying to understand. He was trying to be like, okay, teach me, make me better. And it became a conflict, and eventually, Kendall ended up in New York, and not with the Seahawks, and that was a thing. I mean, it's a different approach. It's an approach that players probably find refreshing because they haven't been given that in the past at any level, where they're truly being taught why we do things the way we do them. And as a leadership style, I like it because, I mean, it's easier to get buy-in if they understand the why. Like it's not just, here, we want you to do this, but then their head, they're going, yeah, but why aren't we doing this other thing? It's going to work better. If there is a why, hey, this is why we're doing it this way. They'll be like, okay, now I get it. And I, as a leadership style goes, I get it. Like that, it's something that would work really well with me. Now, I'm not everybody, but I don't like it. Like it's really, it makes a lot of sense in my brain to teach this way.
No, totally. I agree. I am like that too. I'm eager to learn. I'm a constant lifetime learner. I really enjoy that approach. And I think that translates to most people. I don't want to put myself in a category, but most people that want to be successful, they really want to understand the entire operation so that they have room to grow. They understand the depth of the business better and can do their jobs individually better. And I think that's the real key for this system. And just, we can move on to the other coaches. The Ravens defense was amazing last year. So they led the league in 15.5 points per game. Just to give you an idea, that's a full touchdown better than Seattle. Like Seattle was 23 point something allowed points per game, 15.5 points per game. That's on par with where the Seahawks were at in 2013, 2014. They had 60 sacks. Pressure rates were really high. They played at a high level at all different levels in that defense. And it's just something that I say only because that's something to look forward to. It's like, if you're a defensive guy, and I kind of am, I think that way when I'm looking at games. I really like the defensive stuff. I like offenses, but I'm really kind of a defensive guy, and so the last several years have just been really frustrating for me as a Seahawks fan. And I'm sure many of you can identify with that, no doubt. But it sounds like help is on the way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to getting more out of the talent you have.
Well, let's talk about that for half a second. Let's talk about the talent we have and then translate that into Mike Macdonald's defense. Obviously, Mike Macdonald doesn't have the same players he had at the Ravens, but does he have enough talent with this defense to do everything that he wants to do? Is he going to have to hold back, or is he going to have to, kind of ease into it over the course of the season? How do you think he'll approach?
Well, you're not going to run the same defense, exactly the same as what worked in Baltimore, because you don't have the same players. Baltimore had a strength at middle linebacker with Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith. The Seahawks have a weakness at middle linebacker. So it's not going to be the same. The key is that he takes what he does and adapts it to the talent that he's got. Seattle's is much deeper on the defensive line. They're better significantly at corner than Baltimore was. So you have to do things differently, but you adapt what you do to the talent that you have. You have other strengths. Use it, right? You have different weaknesses. Cover up for those instead of covering up for the ones that you had before. And that's actually why I like Macdonald is as a coach, is because that's one of the things he does, is he has adapted what he does to his talent at his different stops. And it's not going to be the same. I think that's one of the things that I think, Baltimore did exactly this. Well, yeah, but that was because they had the particular group of players they had. Seattle has a different group of players with different strengths. Can you adapt to those strengths?
So you can ask almost the same thing and get the same answer on the offensive side of the ball. So I find it very interesting that Mike Macdonald went out and hired Ryan Grubb.
I think that's why he hired Ryan Grubb.
His mirror image on the offensive side of the ball in a lot of different ways. Here's an air raid offense coming in from college football. This is not an NFL tested system yet, but it can translate. There are things about the Washington offense that can translate for sure, and there's certain things that may not work. Hash marks are a lot closer in the NFL than in college football, where you can spread out a lot pre-snap. Everything is going to be different. New terminology for the players, new protections, new alignments, new route concepts, etc. You can run 7 different plays out of one alignment, and pass plays out of those. Motion on 65% of the snaps, generally speaking.
God, I wish that never happened under Pete. And it seems like it's such a simple thing, but it gives the quarterback more information.
And it gives them more time to diagnose. Yep, all that stuff, right?
I don't understand why teams don't use motion more.
Especially with the player. I've always thought that it hurt the player it hurt the most by not having any motion at all was DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
Because teams could line up on him, double team him straight off the line of scrimmage often. Yeah. And you saw that. You saw him fight through double teams straight off the snap so many times that while you wanted to get DK the ball, he was always in a contested situation, always.
Yeah, put him in motion, which forces everything behind him, in the back of the defense to change if you're going to do that. But it also gives him that extra, yard of separation between him and the corner, which allows him to get off the line smoother. Like, I just think that the offensive coaches that Pete had never did themselves any favors.
So let's talk about Shane Waldron for a second. So I just said that Seattle could, with Grubb, could run 7 different plays out of a certain alignment. And I'm just talking like run plays, and then also pass plays built off those same alignments. Shane Waldron's offense had similar things, as well as the Rams' offense with Sean McVay and so forth. What's different about this as opposed to that?
Well, what's different is just the plays that they're running. The individual formations that are used. There's the concepts as far as like wanting to be able to run a whole bunch of things off the same alignment is the same. They just go about it in slightly different ways. But no, I mean, that was one of the things that was good about Shane Waldron's scheme, was that you couldn't tell from formation settings where the ball was going. Which is the opposite of Schottenheimer, right? Because when he was here, you could look at the formation where guys are lined up, and you're like, oh, well, this is the play. And it became obvious that opposing teams could do that too. And so they went to, but Waldron's system, it was based around, okay, we're gonna get into this formation and we're gonna run one of these, 8-10 plays out of this exact formation. But it was static, right? There wasn't put guys in motion. There wasn't that kind of stuff. Where with Grubb, you're gonna have guys line up, but that where they line up is going to include motion before the snap, and it's going to either come from a particular alignment or going into a particular alignment, so that way you can run your play that's called. And so. It's just taking the idea of that Waldron did and just taking it to the next level.
So Geno Smith's been pretty good. In fact, one of the top 5 quarterbacks on play action passes. This kind of does a little bit more. So I've always thought that Geno could do more and maybe struggled a little bit with pre-snap looks and trying to figure out the defense.
That was his weakness in New York, was that he did not do enough or anything pre-snap. He tried to figure everything else out, post-snap. Right. When he first took over in Seattle, it was surprising at how good he was at making those reads and changes and figuring things out pre-snap. And that worked for, 10 games of 2022. And then he started to get away from it. And you look last year, and it was frustrating how many times he was fooled pre-snap.
Yes.
And I don't know
didn't call the right line protections, didn't. There were no adjustments. There was no reason to have any pre-snap stuff because they never did anything with that information.
Yeah. And so we'll see what we get,
processing wise. Yeah. Right.
Geno has it in him. The dude studies as hard as anyone. He knows his football. He really does. I think he could be a good coach when his playing days are over because he knows his football. But why did they get away from it? Why was he making either fewer reads pre-snap or wrong ones? Especially in this last year, where it was obvious who was coming in a blitz, but they didn't shift the protection to pick up.
I think that's something that goes back to Shane Waldron and not helping Geno with any motion that would enable Geno to help identify some of those things.
Yeah,
like if you're static, you're allowing the defense to dictate terms, And to me, that's what was going on there. Now, some things to look for in this new offense. The screens. You're going to notice the Seattle not only attempt, but be successful at the screen game for the first time in decades, I think, right?
Yeah.
It's like
since
the University of Washington had a screen run on every 8 throws.
God, that slows pass rush down.
So look at that. Right. Okay. So now you got exactly what I was going for. So look for that. Also likes to run dual crossing routes a lot, where you've got you're crossing, in the middle of the opposite sides of the field, and you're rubbing. So you've always heard about rub routes and so forth. The Seahawks have never really completely run that. I think it helps. All 3 of our top wide receivers would benefit from those type of routes, especially DK Metcalf, and because he's just a huge dude, and also disguising, where the ball is intended to go and so forth. That really helps. And then short routes, short curl type routes, playing off of that. When you have loose coverage. So if you're doing those rubs and your corners don't want to be rubbed, right, they're going to back off a little bit, and that opens up that short curl game. It opens up your tight ends and so forth. The whole idea of Grubb's scheme is to get the ball out quickly, and so that you do that, you set that up, and then you take your shots.
Issue. Because Geno Smith held on to the ball far too long.
But I also think that he can process and get the ball out quickly, and he showed that as well.
He did.
I think it's Waldron.
He did in 2022. I don't know. You look at Waldron and Pete Carroll are both they were frustrated. They were like, we got to get the ball out quicker. He's got to get the ball out of his hand. He's got to get the ball out quicker.
But then you look at the route concepts that they were running.
Yeah, we've had this conversation. You say that, and yes, there are times when they were running, all 4 guys deep, but there were plenty of plays where there were guys open early and he didn't throw the ball. He waited for the longer route to develop and got sacked before it developed, when the ball just needed to get out of his hand.
What are you expecting to see?
What am I expecting to see? I'm expecting to see I'm expecting to see a lot more of the ball getting out of his hand. It's going to look a lot more like 2022 because
I agree. Totally
it's
agree.
not it's going to be a lot more of diagrammed into it. We need 8 yards. Go get us 8 yards. This isn't go get the best outcome out of this play call versus the defense. It was go get us the 8 yards.
I agree with you, and I also disagree with you slightly on that, but I agree with you in principle on most of that statement.
Well, and then it's going to be when it's time to take the shot, that's going to be called, right? It's not a situation where you're going to, every play has a potential to take a shot if the defense does the right thing. There's going to be more. We're going to do a lot of this, the running game, the underneath stuff, the short pass, the crossers, and occasionally we're going to dial up a shot. And if the shot's not there, we're going to give you other options.
I think they're going to be a little bit more aggressive than that. You go look at the University of Washington. The reason I say that is, on 3rd and 3 or whatever, you're probably looking to just get to the sticks, move the sticks a little bit. There were many, many times where they would take a shot 20 yards downfield on 3rd and 3.
Yes, I hated that.
I hate that too. I hate that too, but I think you're going to see that, and sometimes it's going to be frustrating. Other times we're going to make it work, and it's going to be like, wow, that was aggressive. I think they're going to lean more aggressive. I just get this feeling based on the personnel that we've got and the defense we're going to try to have. I think they're going to be comfortable trying to take shots in those sorts of situations where you would normally be a little bit more conservative. I think.
See, I disagree, and the reason why I disagree is the offensive line, because they've mentioned, Schneider has mentioned, the offensive line is a weakness. It's still a work in progress. We still have work. So his quote was, "We still have work to do on the offensive line." So they know that protection's going to be a challenge. And I don't think you dial up, a 20-yard pass on 3rd and 3 when you know that protection is going to be a problem. You dial up a 5-yard pass on 3rd and 3, and you get the first down, and you move the chains, and you live to.
I agree with that philosophy, and I've seen enough football to know that most of the time that conservative approach in that situation works, depending on where you're at in field position, what the score is, etc. But, yeah, I want to see how this translates, because there is a tendency, and in college football, it's a lot easier, especially if you're University of Washington and you've got the line that they did have, and you've got the quarterback they had, plus the weapons. It's a lot easier to move the chains in college, and you're already up, 2 or 3 scores. It's a different way of thinking about how aggressive you can be in a football game. In the NFL, you're not going to be moving people off the line of scrimmage by feet. You're going to be moving guys by inches. You're not going to be able to gash as much as you did in college. Whereas you're looking for 4 yards average for your running backs in the NFL. And in college football, man, guys were picking up 6.5, 7 yards per carry at a regular interval. So, you're right. The offensive line is key, I think, to this entire operation being successful or not.
See, Grubb hasn't always had that elite offensive line that he had in Washington. If you look at his earlier stops where, he's trying to do the same things, but without the same quality of athlete, he ran the ball more. He was more conservative. I think he got to Washington and was like, holy crap. Like, talk about Christmas. I got the best offensive line in the country, and Penix and Aduze. Oh, hell yeah. We're taking this Ferrari for a spin. And that's what happened. I mean, you saw that Washington offense was awesome. Yeah. Like, I really thought they were going to come away with the national title. They were that good. The offense was that good. And some of that was Grubb and the way it was coordinated, but some of it was just talent.
Yeah,
he just had the talent. He doesn't have the offensive line talent with the Seahawks.
So they brought in Huff, Scott Huff. Mm-hmm. It's his first season in the NFL, but he's been an offensive line coach for quite a while. Spent the last 7 seasons prior with the University of Washington. Went through a couple different coaching changes. They kept him, even through regime changes. But the offensive line at the University of Washington, I mean, they allowed 7 sacks in 13 games in 2022, second fewest in all of college football. But while ranking 5th in passing attempts, think about that.
Yeah,
that's remarkable, really. They run a mix of gap and scheme and zone schemes. They really demand a lot of athleticism from their
They ran a lot more outside zone running than Seattle has.
Which I'm not sure how that translates into the NFL when you have so much speed on the outside in the NFL on defense.
I think it translates really well because it actually takes advantage of the speed, and it gets them to overcommit, and it allows those cutback lanes.
So you attack the defense where they're. Yeah.
I mean, this is the that is the scheme that Denver used for all those years, producing 1,000-yard rusher after 1,000-yard rusher with guys like Ron Dane, who could not succeed in any other system. And I know it's easy to be like, oh, guys move past, the league moves past scheme and you can whatever. But you go back and you look at this last year, it was still being used in a lot. Seattle went with inside zone stuff because it fit Russell Wilson. And then it became, let's not make too big drastic changes because it's too hard on the offensive line to make these drastic changes. But now you got a new scheme coming in. Go ahead and make the change. I think it works better. It puts a lot more pressure on the opposing defense to try and stop the run, which allows your passing schemes to have more time. So I think it's a good shift. And with Huff, it points to one of the things that's true about almost all the coaching hires that they did with the staff, is they went and found guys that could teach. These are guys that are known, a lot of younger guys, a lot of guys coming from the college ranks that are known for teaching and getting guys to learn technique and just maximize that part of their game, which I like. I mean, you could talk about coaching guys up. This is a young team.
Yeah.
It is an offensive
with the young
line.
Coaching staff.
The offensive line is really young.
Yeah.
So go get a guy that can teach and get them to make sure that the bad habits aren't developed, right? Keep them doing what, improving their technique and that kind of stuff, so you can get more out of them, not just this year, but down the line. I love the fact that they went and found teachers.
So I'm a little bit more worried about this on the offensive side, and we can talk about this, than the defensive side, but I think it applies to both. And so I want to just talk about a couple of concerns overall. The real concern for me on the offensive side is, if something is not working, is Ryan Grubb adaptable? Like, he's never been in the NFL. We don't know what defenses are going to get thrown at him. Is he adaptable? Can he make something work? And how does he do with in-game adjustments? Can the offensive line, which by all accounts is still going to be mediocre this year, there's hope. They could get better throughout the year. They could end up being really pretty strong, but initially it looks like they're going to be still middling. Can they function at a high enough level to allow the offense to function as intended? Can they put in the whole playbook, or do they need to be conservative because the offensive line is porous?
Yeah.
Also, it's all about the players. And for me, it all starts with Geno Smith. Like, Smith has put up really good, strong numbers in Seattle, ranking in the top 10 in passing yards, touchdowns, completion percentage in the last couple seasons. He's been, back and forth, but kind of in that range, and shown that he can do game-winning drives and so forth. But it's all about the offensive line, to me. It's one of those things where I just think that might hold him back. And then the adjustments that Grubb makes. And the full autonomy for the offense is on him. I mean, Mike Macdonald's the defensive guy, he's the head coach, but Ryan Grubb was hired to be completely autonomous and run the offense that he wants.
Yeah, and that's a lot of pressure, because, there's no one to pass the buck to when you screw up. But it comes down to the in-game adjustments, and can they examine on the fly what isn't working and why it isn't working, and make adjustments so they can get the offense rolling when teams adjust to them. Or you come out and you have a great plan and it's working, and then the defense changes what they're doing and they take it away from you. Can you make the right adjustment? And we won't know that
until it happens. They just have no experience.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it with, talking about Washington. Like, they just had better athletes. They go out and they play almost anyone in the old Pac-12 conference, and they were just more talented than the other team. That makes needing to make the kind of adjustments a lot, a smaller priority. Now, he's not going to have that talent gap.
He's going to have to be a tactician, as he had to be in the past.
He has, not at Washington. But you look at earlier stops in his career, and yes, he has. One of the things I have really liked about him is his ability to adapt what he's doing to the talent in front of him. When he had a good quarterback, they threw the ball a lot. When he didn't, they ran the ball a lot. Things like that. Like when he had good receivers, he spread teams out. When he didn't have elite receivers, he got the ball down the field using play action. Like, he's smart. He's really smart.
So let me ask you this.
The NFL is also really smart.
with an aggressive-minded mindset that Ryan Grubb has, just in general terms, what are some of the things that he's going to appreciate from both Geno Smith, but also Sam Howell?
So, one of the things he's going to appreciate is that Geno Smith throws a damn good deep ball. As much as I like him getting the ball out of his hand fast enough, when he has the time and can sit back and throw the ball down the field, he throws it really well. So when it's one of those things where you finally dial up the play and your receiver is open and he's got that separation, your quarterback has to deliver it. Because if he throws it short and it screws everything up, it's like, well, then why did we spend the last 14 plays setting this up? And so he's really going to like that.
So he went from Penix to Geno Smith. Those are very competent quarterbacks in the system. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think he's going to like that. He's going to like, Geno keeps his eyes downfield really well. So even when there's pressure, he has to move off his spot. He's got to get outside. He's looking downfield. He's not looking to run. You look at Howell. Howell isn't as good deep down the field, but I think he's better in the mid range as far as his accuracy. He's bigger. He's a lot harder to tackle. He's going to need to, get better at knowing when to escape the pocket instead of letting it just collapse in on him.
Do we know where Sam Howell is as far as his ability with pre-snap stuff?
No, it's so hard to tell because he's only got one season, a partial season as a starter. I think he had 12 games last year.
So we don't know how he processes. I mean,
it's really hard to tell because that offense was so bad. Like their offensive line made Seattle's offensive line look good. It was that bad. Like
that's true.
Coming to Seattle means Sam Howell has a significantly better offensive line than he had last year. And Seattle's offensive line is the biggest question mark on this entire team. It's not a strength, but it is significantly better than what Washington had last year. So it's impossible to really know much about Sam Howell given that. It's just a mess.
Is this we've already been told Geno Smith's the unquestioned starter.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam Howell's kind of accepted that. But is there any scenario that you can think of where Sam Howell pushes Geno because he's a better fit in Ryan Grubb's scheme?
Sure. He's younger. He's cheaper. The team would love for it to be Howell, to come in and wow everyone and take the job. And wow, now we've got our young franchise quarterback. Cool. They would love that to happen. They don't expect it to happen. But yeah, definitely.
It doesn't seem like anybody's talking about that really. Like what kind of a quarterback we have in Sam Howell?
Well, because there's been a lot of debate. There were people pre-draft saying that Sam Howell would not have been, that the current edition of Sam Howell with the year of experience would not have been a first round pick. Even, amongst the other 6 guys that were, that he still would have been down. And there are other people that said, hey, that year of experience, the game slowed down for him and, that matters. And you see all the tools,
you look at the first
and everything.
10 games as well.
Yeah. And there were people who were like, yeah, he's, other than Caleb Williams, he was the closest thing to a sure thing in this draft class. I don't believe that, but there were analysts that said that. So I think there's a lot of debate as to who Sam Howell is as a quarterback and where he can get to.
I love the idea that we went out and signed him, that we identified who we wanted. We went out and got him. Now he's in this system and he's behind one of the best quarterbacks, mentoring style quarterbacks in the NFL in Geno Smith. He's in a perfect situation, really. And Seahawks are consequently.
Yeah. I mean, Geno went out of his way to help Locke. learn how to do more during film sessions and get more out of them. And those kind of things. Like he taught Locke. Like Locke's going to get an opportunity this year to compete for a job and maybe finally emerge as a starter. And a lot of that is because of the work that Geno Smith did helping him out. So now he's going to come in and Hal's going to have that opportunity to learn in the same way. He's only 23. He's a young kid. He's younger than Penix and Bo Nix.
By a year. So,
yeah, he's going to get a chance to come in and learn and learn how to be a pro and be better at that. And he's already got that year of starting experience where the game has started to slow down for him. And he's starting to recognize more what he's looking at. Like there's a lot to like there. And he's got tools that you wouldn't think of from a guy that used to be a 5th round pick. He may end up being an elite starting quarterback at some point. He also may end up being Charlie Whitehurst, who had all the tools.
Who was the quarterback? And I just lost his name for a minute there. That you kind of comp to him in the NFL already. Shorter guy, very competitive. Was Cleveland's quarterback for a while. Drafted by Cleveland, and then moved on after Watson got there. Kind of had some success last year. Played with the Rams for half a season as a backup. Came in and played.
Honestly, I don't remember.
Shorter stature, but tough as nails. You know, that I can't remember his name. I don't even remember what roster he's on. He had some success last year. Maybe it was Tampa, right? Tampa's quarterback.
Oh, no, I didn't. That would have been. I didn't never comp him to him. Because
Baker Mayfield.
Yep, that's where we go. I didn't, because I thought that there are maturity leadership issues with Mayfield that I think he's overcome at this point. I don't know.
It's kind of like Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray needed 4 or 5 years in the NFL to mature.
True.
Honest. And of all of them, all those years.
And Mayfield still has some issues where he rubs his teammates the wrong way, and did so last year in Tampa. So,
but he did sign a new 3-year contract with Tampa Bay.
True, he did. We'll see how that plays out.
So we've been at this for an hour. Are there other coaches on this?
I want to talk about Andre Dird real quick before we call it a day. This is a guy that's from England. So the jokes about, football and him just make themselves, because it's like what was the TV show, the American football coach who went to England to ended up coaching a soccer team because he thought it was a football. Yeah. Like that show. And so now it's like, it's the other way around. But no, this guy knows his stuff. He came in, he started in Dallas, left, has coached 8 years, was back as the defensive line coach. Now he's a defensive coordinator in Seattle. And you go, well, why? He doesn't run a similar scheme. You have, he was the defensive line coach for Quinn. That's a 4-3 defense. That's a completely different scheme than anything that Seattle's going to be doing. Clearly, if he's being hired for the idea that he's not married to a scheme. He clearly is going to be a guy that, at least what he portrayed to Macdonald, was that he's adaptable. He's a good communicator. He can get things from the coordinator's position, which is him, out to the position coaches in a way that's going to be effective, so they can very quickly and easily and accurately teach to the players exactly what Macdonald wants, for that particular game plan and that kind of stuff. But we don't really know anything about him other than He's defensive coordinator, perhaps in name only.
Well, Mike Macdonald really spoke well of him. He said that he knocked his interview process out of the park. So they did a Zoom interview at first, and then they brought him in, and he was like completely aligned with Macdonald on the basics of defensive philosophy, how they want to put players in a position to be successful. What are their individual roles? How do they fit in the big picture? What are they good at? What are they not good at? How can I help, individual players, but also the scheme in general? A good teacher, good person, articulate, hard worker. You just hear all the attributes about him that you'd like to see in that position. And like you said, came from a 4-3 under Dan Quinn. But if you've got the philosophical alignment with Mike Macdonald, he brought him in specifically for his brain. Like, this guy's just a smart guy, knows what he's doing. Mike Macdonald felt like this guy could have a successful marriage with Macdonald to the point where he can call his defense. So there's an immediate level of trust there that you just don't get. And then Arden endured, Coach Micah Parsons and the really decent, consistent defensive lines in Dallas for the last 3 seasons. So I like the signing. There's a low risk, high reward kind of a thing with this kid. Obviously, they couldn't hire and I don't call him a kid. He's not a kid. You had to hire somebody that didn't need to call the defense, that could just be defensive coordinator in name only and grow into the position, which he can.
Because Macdonald was going to call his defense. He wasn't going to hire someone else to do it when he's being brought in because he knows defense, and he wants ownership of that. Like, he trusts himself. And so, you had to hire someone who's going to be okay with that. And so there's that. But I did find it interesting that this is a guy that knows, as far as his experience, he knows 4-3 stuff. He's being brought in to coordinate a 3-4. Which is different. There's different gap assignments, different ways around it, but apparently his philosophy fits in really well with what Macdonald wants to do. So we'll see.
I don't know that necessarily the 4-3 thing really matters as much, because if you take a look at even like when Macdonald runs nickel, and Macdonald runs nickel about 75% of the time, 78% of the time at Baltimore. Probably similar here because we've got a really nice defensive back room, and you kind of we have a limited quality at linebacker.
Yeah.
So you're going to see that. But in those situations, often you're playing an over front, 4-3 as opposed to under. And so those alignments are going to come into play anyway. So I think that it's less about previous scheme experience versus overall philosophy. And I think, obviously they hired him. So, how about any other coaches? They've got a defensive line coach, Justin Hines. He's kind of a up and coming guy in the NFL, but a lot of college experience, 16 seasons coaching. Most of those in college, though. Quarterbacks coach, Charles London, don't know too much about him. Frischman, Jackson, again, a younger coached with Pittsburgh the last couple seasons. Offensive pass game coordinator. I find that intriguing, actually, because Jake Peets was with the Rams and as in the same role. And so to me, that is somewhat insightful.
Yeah.
And then Carl Scott's defensive back coach. He's been around. He's known as being a good teacher. You mentioned that aspect.
Yes.
All these guys are kind of the teacher.
That's the thing, is these are guys that are really good at teaching technique and those kind of things. And that's what Macdonald wanted. He wanted guys that could teach. There's something to be said about that, but there's also something to be said about the other half of that position, which is guys that can motivate. You look at Ken Norton, who was not a good defensive coordinator, but was a great linebacker coach. Part because he could teach, okay, mostly because he could motivate. He was the master motivator on.
And Pete Carroll, for goodness sake.
Yeah. And so there's two sides to that job. It's not just the teaching part, but sometimes it's about how to push guys. And Macdonald went the teaching route with almost every position. Clearly, he looked at this and said, we have a young team. If we're going to do anything with it, we got to make these guys better as individuals. And we'll worry about motivating, down the
What
down
about
the road.
A leader? What about just being a leader of men? Mike Macdonald. Like, how do you read him? Because it's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell it's hard to tell because all we see are, interviews and press conferences and stuff like that. Like we got to see him out on the field. We got to see him on the sideline, and that kind of stuff. So far, the returns look good because you have he's got the respect of the best players, guys like Devin Witherspoon we mentioned earlier, and that bodes very well. But it comes down. We'll see. We've seen smart coaches fail in the NFL because they lose track of that. They get into their scheme and all of that, and they're not leaders of men. And you got to have that. You got to have that, general or admiral kind of quality to you. And we'll see. I don't see I'm not concerned about it at this point, but you never know.
You never know. You really don't. And that's part of the question that still remains. And there are a lot of questions, but that's probably the biggest one is how is this going to all turn out? How is he going to put it all together? Like how's the glue going to come together? It's to be fascinating to watch this in the next 5-6 months as we progress. Upcoming shows. We are doing a look around the NFC overall and the NFC West. In our next show, we've got the biggest show of the year for us is the question and answer beer show, which is the week of the 4th of July.
That's perfect.
That's coming up right. I think
we need to make sure we need to not have that show in the morning though, because if I'm going to be
we talk about this every year.
Yeah, because if I'm gonna be sampling beers with you,
12:01 p.m.
Yeah, I don't want to be doing that at 8 a.m. Let's.
I loved the first year that we did this because we did it in person, and I think maybe the second year too because we had a spread, we had some barbecue and some.
I brought homebrew.
Yeah, you brought some homebrew. Yeah, we did it in person. That was amazing. Mm-hmm. Love to be able to do that again at some point. I still need to get you down here to the desert as well. You probably don't want to come the first week of July though.
I don't. I'm sorry. No, I used to live down there and it was awful this time of year. Like just absolutely awful.
It is awful. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, the summers in Arizona are just as awful as the winters up here. For completely different reasons, but still awful.
Yeah. I'm going to a little mountain cabin, this weekend.
Nice.
Because it's going to be 112 here.
Oh shit.
So, that's just every day between now and mid-September, it's unless monsoons come, which happens and it cools down for part of the day sometimes.
That was one of the things. Phoenix just didn't get the monsoons that Tucson did.
Yes, Tucson does get them.
Because we got them, because I was in Tucson, we got them more often and got hit harder by them. And God, it was like the only thing that saved me was, it's like, come on, bring the rain. It's only temporary, but that 10 degrees matters.
So I'm in central Phoenix here. And often if we do have monsoons in the area, you get them everywhere except for right here. Because we are in the flattest part of the desert here in central Phoenix. And so often you'll have those things around the mountain areas around the city, but not actually in the city. So there's some years where it might rain 5 inches. You might have 5 inches of monsoon rain in a 8-week period, but central Phoenix will have like half an inch or less. But anyway, in some years that you have a little bit more. Last year was what actually rained. I think it was like 2.5, 3 inches, which is pretty decent for this particular area. But it's nice because the temperature can go from 105 or 110 down to 78 in a matter of minutes, 20 minutes, and stay there for a while, and through the evening. And so it's kind of nice.
Yeah. And then it goes back up, and with it goes the humidity.
Yes. You wake up in the morning and it's humid and it's already hot again. And you're like, ugh, yeah, fun. Okay. And then after that question and answer show, we just got a few things before we get to the training camp stuff. Training camp starts early this year. I think the 17th of July is when the rookies show up, 23rd for the vets. So the rookies actually get a full week without any vets there to kind of come in. And the reason they do that is we've got a new coaching staff. So that enables an early start for our guys. So
gotta like it.
All right. Let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at MyersNFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast on your favorite podcast platform and our YouTube channel. And we hope that you subscribe when you land on one of those. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.